Moving on to blue, we have a pretty ridiculous aura in the Mythic slot, and I hope you love clones because this one's a real doozy. Mechanized Production will, if you wish, clone you a Wormcoil engine every turn. If that wasn't enough, it will win you the game if you have 8 Wormcoil engines, or whatever artifact you put it on. Seriously, I think this is just plain ridiculous, and I'm sure EDH players will love this card to death. I mean, with all the crazy artifacts you can make, it's just pretty ridiculous. I mean, think about it. 8 copies of Gilded Lotus, 8 copies of Thurandanimo, 8 copies of, well, you get the idea. Plus, it will likely see some play in those formats or those situations, and on the kitchen table in competitive tournaments and other constructed Magic formats. I can't really say it for sure, but my god, it does pump out a lot of value, so do keep this card in mind. To be honest, I've kind of wanted a card like Brawl, Chief of Compliance, for a really long time. In a sense, this is sort of a counter to a card like Thalia, Guardian, or Thrabian, or any of the annoying mud cards that you often see in a format like Legacy or Vintage. Frankly, I think this may even give Storm decks in Modern another chance, even though you haven't seen too many of them these days. And frankly, who doesn't love things like 1-mana remands? I mean, that's pretty fun if you ask me. I can honestly think of a lot of scenarios where this will be really fantastic, but I mean, if you want to win the game with it on its own, good luck with that. I mean, a 1-3 usually is not super powerful, which obviously, for obvious reasons, there goes your 20-turn clock, if you know what I'm saying. But frankly, I think it does have a lot of great purposes. Plus, that second ability does not hurt either, especially if you do like to run counters. In short, this will actually turn all your 3-mana counter spells into, well, counter spells. Speaking of countering spells, or 3-mana counter spells, for example, we have Disallow, which is basically mono blue Void Slime. Honestly, I've really liked Void Slime, and I think a lot of people really like Void Slime because of its versatility, and now we get a mono blue version, which is just absolutely fantastic. The problem with Void Slime was that it was 2 colors, and now we don't have to worry about that anymore, because now we just have a colorless blue Void Slime. Hooray! The best news is if you're using Brawl, it just costs 2, so you have a Void Slime that costs 2 mana if you happen to have those 2 cards. Yippee! While we're on the topic of Brawl, let's talk about his Expertise spell, which bounces a whole lot of permanents. Like I said, this could be used as a way to cheat in your Living End or something similar like that. But frankly, I don't know if that's the best use you can come up with it. Still, this seems like it provides a butt-ton of value, as bouncing 3 things will not only give you a bit of a momentum shift, but will also trigger your Revolt triggers if you have any. Like I say, your spell that you cast that costs 4 or less could likely have a Revolt trigger, and, well, like I say, value ensures. Like I said, this is a solid card, and although it's a sorcery, it has potential to provide a load of value beyond belief. Don't count this out in any format you play it in, folks. Moving on to another new mechanic, we have the Improvise mechanic, which is very similar to that of Convoke. Rather than paying mana for your spells, you can tap artifacts to pay for the colorless mana symbols. This is a bit different from Convoke, because Convoke you could actually pay for the colored symbols in your spells. Improvise is not as, well, good, so to speak, but it still can be very useful. Personally, I'm quite excited about the improvised version of Court of Calling, aka Word of Invention, which will allow me to Court of Calling for any artifact. Like before, as I stated, if you have a ton of artifacts, this spell becomes a lot easier to cast. Sadly, your blue artifacts from the Alara Reborn cycle, or Alara cycle I should say, won't be able to pay for the blue mana symbols, unless they have, like, provide a blue mana by tapping them as a mana source. Still, this is a card you have to watch out for, as Court of Calling is very popular to this day in Modern, and this likely will be too. Of course, you can always just pay 3 blue and fetch an artifact that costs 0, which may likely happen. I'm certainly going to get my copies of these. These look like they're a lot of fun, and as we all know, tutoring for artifacts, or anything in general, is just a really flippin' good effect, especially if it puts it onto the battlefield directly. I'm actually quite happy with a lot of the blue cards in this set, because although blue's rares are fantastic for this set, their uncommons are also really frickin' good. Check out this Shielded Aether Thief, for example. It not only is a flash blocker, but can provide you energy whenever it blocks. Considering there are a lot of control decks that rely on energy in the standard format, this likely is what these decks really need, is a nice creature that can provide energy and provide early game stability. On top of that, if you get enough energy, you can even have it draw cards for you, and this will likely be a real great ability in addition to what this card does already. Hot dog, this will likely see play in all those decks if those decks are still around. My goodness, this is just swell. I love this card. Although blue is a little bit lacking in the Revolt department, the Illusionist Strategy is a wonderful way to trigger these abilities. If you like to splice colors or have multiple color decks, this does not seem like a bad choice, at least for standard. It also does give you a card, so do keep in mind that if you have a bunch of Revolt triggers, this gives you an additional card in addition to any other effect that those Revolt creatures will have. This is quite spectacular when you really think about it, because if you do run a bunch of little creatures that do revolve around Revolt, then yeah, you can get a lot of value from this. On top of that, it's also an instant, so just think about like how much value you can get at the end of your opponent's turn, or surprising them with Revolt triggers the moment things enter the battlefield, and it can be used in great effect if done correctly. Although we didn't really get any proliferate-like effects for this set, which would help us with our energy counters and 1/1 counters that could potentially be there, we did get this nice pirate, the Skyship Plunderer. This dude's pretty nifty because he can give you either more energy or more 1/1 counters for one of your other creatures. Since both are quite common within this block, it's likely there will be some use for this guy. Plus, he also flies, so getting these trigger to trigger shouldn't be too difficult unless your opponent is also playing flying or reach creatures. Still, I think this is a very fantastic card, and it will see a lot of play in some format or another, or at least in decks where it is somewhat synergistic. While it may appear to be a little slow, the Efficient Construction card will give you a lot of value for all the artifacts that you play. Considering that a lot of EDH decks like to run artifacts, you will get a lot of Thopters if you do. Personally, I can think of a lot of decks where a card like this could really be beneficial, but in terms of constructed play, I'm not sure how well this will do. In short, this will likely be somewhat of a Bitter Blossom-like effect as long as you play artifacts, so although it's nowhere near as good or as efficient as Bitter Blossom, it still could see a lot of play. Keep in mind there are a lot of effects that bounce permanents in this set, so do keep in mind you could likely recycle a couple of your artifacts to your hand and then play them again and get more value. Joining the Trinket and Treasure Mage is the Trophy Mage. I mean, we kind of were sort of expecting this at some point or another. We had Trinket Mage, which got the smallest of the smallest artifacts. We had Treasure Mage, which got the biggest of the biggest artifacts. And now we have Trophy Mage, which will just fetch you your swords. Nonetheless, fetching a sword or another artifact with CMC of 3 is quite nifty. Anything that tutors is really nice, as I've stated before. And frankly, I really think that this is actually a very playable card. It will likely see play in EDH, and it may even see play in Constructed Magic if an artifact with CMC 3 is needed in any sort of situation, which it likely will sometime or another. While it may not be as good as Thoughtcast, Reverse Engineer I feel like will be a very playable card. Although Thoughtcast will likely remain in the Affinity decks, those that do run it, I still think this is a neat card, and if you do run additional artifacts or a deck that runs artifacts with a casual build, it will likely be joining that as well. You also have to keep in mind it's 3 cards and not 2, although it does kind of trade that off because it's a sorcery and it will at most cost 2 blue mana. It's still a pretty solid card, and drawing 3 cards for 2 mana is still really good, so don't count it out just because it's not as powerful as the most powerful spell that could, well, be in a potential format. Although they don't look too so spectacular, blue has a lot of great commons as well. Ice Over is a solid removal enchantment that can hinder a creature early in the game. Cards like Narcolepsy have seen play in Standard before, so don't count this out whatsoever. It likely will be a solid 2-mana removal spell for any creature that you have to deal with. It's no surprise we have a reprint of Negates. This honestly was kind of a predictable move, but honestly, like I say, I'm actually very happy to see Negate. Negate's kind of one of the cornerstones of Standard, and honestly, a Standard without Negate is kind of a weird format. But to be honest, there's a lot of other cards that are missing from Standard at the moment that we really do need and are not, well, really here. Bastion Inventor may have been playable in hexproof decks if Improvise allows you to pay for some other ways, but I highly doubt this will see play for Modern at least. Still, if you can cut corners, this thing could likely cause a lot of trouble if it decides to stick, so don't count this out. Like I say, and as we've learned before the hard way, having a spell with a lower converted mana cost or getting a cost deduction really can make a big impact, so do not count this card out. Another similar card to this is the Metallic Rebuke spell, which is basically a mana leak for 1 mana if you control a couple of artifacts. Personally, I think Mana Leak is overall better in most situations, but this is still a card you should look out for. It may even see play in Affinity, you don't know. I know a lot of Affinity decks like to run things like Spell Pierce and a couple other spells that are very similar, and this may very well take its place, so do not count this out either. Finally, if you love energy, the Shipwreck Moray will give you a lot of energy for a fairly reasonable cost of 4 mana. Although you likely won't be attacking with it unless you have a ton of energy. This thing will serve as a solid blocker. 5 toughness is nothing to sneeze at, and it's still really good if you get energy. Like I said before, there's a lot of ways to bounce and recycle your creatures in this set, so getting this back will be pretty sweet if you love energy. Just keep this card in mind if, well, you love energy. And I know I'm sounding incredibly redundant. One thing I don't get is why on earth this Drake can't block artifact creatures. Maybe if you did allow it to block artifact creatures, you wouldn't have to ban things like Smuggler's Copter. And yes, I'm going to keep bringing this up all day, like it or not.